We're joined by Ken Haber. He's been with us providing some legal insight. Ken is a local attorney, former prosecutor, defense attorney, has worked on death penalty cases. Ken, you heard Audrey Glickman, who survived at the Tree of Life that morning by hiding in a storage area with hiding beneath a prayer shawl. I thought her comment was interesting. She said, if not for this difficult trial, which frankly some people did not want to endure, she said the deeds of this criminal would have been glossed over in the annals of history. And she says to her, the purpose of the death penalty is to cut the offender off from spreading the infection of his heinous beliefs to others. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first from a legal standpoint.
Yeah.
You know, what hasn't really been mentioned here is that the defense, his attorneys, offered to plead guilty to this crime almost from the beginning. And my understanding is repeatedly over 4.5 years, overtures were made to the U.S. Attorney's Office here, to the Justice Department, possibly all the way to Attorney General Merrick Garland. Pleas were made to take the death penalty off the table, and we don't need to go through all this because, oftentimes victims and their families of victims relive the trial, and it can be horrific all over again. What I heard in the press conference just now was that they, and I understand this, that there's this desire to have the world know what happened here. This kind of goes beyond the legal portion, but I think there's a whole history of the Jewish people and other who have been oppressed that if the history is not written, if it's not remembered, if it's not reminded, the fear is that it's forgotten and that it can happen all over again. And that's the message I got out of it, and I completely understand that.
The world knows what happened here. I mean, this was covered internationally. Certainly Jews all over the world were very aware of what happened here. But I think what she is saying that it's not just that the world know what happened here. It's that the world know how the Pittsburgh community responded to it. And they responded to it through today's verdict in the most extreme, severe, and those who spoke today signaled appropriate way.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that was part of it as well. I think that every person who spoke here today spoke eloquently. Every victim's family member spoke eloquently. I can't imagine what they have gone through, and certainly would never question their feelings about this.
Well, and as they said, I think they wanted it to be clear that with the ultimate penalty, which we saw today, that, as Martin Gaynor just said, this is a signal that anti-Semitism has no place in our heart, our community, our country, and it will not be tolerated. Like you said, it's really, they wanted that signal to be sent, and I think, they today expressed that they felt that this was.
What stood out to you? You listened along with us as we heard from the victims' families. What stood out to you most?
I think that the message that this can't be tolerated. Obviously, the pain that they're all have been going through, which is just insurmountable and unable to calculate that. But I also wonder, and I don't want to speculate, but I do know that there were, and I don't know who they were, but it was reported that some victims' families did not want the death penalty to be sought.
Yes.
And some did, and I think most did, and I think they're all entitled to that feeling and that belief, and none of us should really question how someone feels that's in that position. But I think it probably was very difficult. I think the Jewish community as a whole is the saying in Hebrew, l'chaim, it means to life, and I think that the Jewish community believes that as a whole, and I think this challenged that belief to individually to people's cores, and I really feel for each and every one of them because of that.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because the New Light congregation sent out comments following the death penalty saying that many people see the death penalty as a revenge, but that they were choosing not to see it as revenge, despite the vigorous debate over the death penalty, that they accept the jury's decision and believe that as a society we need to take a stand that requires the ultimate penalty of the law, and that life in prison without parole would have allowed the shooter to celebrate his deeds for many years. So, you know, different takes on the death penalty, kind of how to view that.
Rabbi Myers said, he called the verdict an immense embrace from the halls of justice. And this is what I think we're all circling around this, saying the trial and its result demonstrate that our government does not condone anti-Semitism. So even though there may have been, we know that there were some in the Tree of Life, Dor Hadash, New Life community who may not have supported the prosecution's decision to pursue the death penalty. Even if they would have been satisfied with life in prison, there is this strong, is it not a stronger message for a death sentence to be handed down? It's as if, even though the punishment, you know, who knows how long the appeals are going to go, who knows how many more years this killer has to live, but it's the fact that the jury chose the very, you know, the most severe penalty available to them. That's the biggest message of all.
It may be, but jurors are not impaneled to hear cases to send messages. And
Doesn't mean they don't.
It doesn't mean they don't, and I think that it's obvious that there's some sort of message here. And I certainly I'm not commenting on that. But jurors are not part of our government. Jurors aren't there to create policy. Jurors are not there to send messages. And you know, that kind of goes to the core question. You know, this system we have, and the fact that the death penalty is even legal. And I'm not speaking about this case in particular, but to put fellow citizens in that position to decide whether someone lives or dies, you know, that's a very challenging thought to me, and I have trouble with it.
All right, take us through what's going to happen tomorrow. This is not over. Tomorrow there will be the formal sentencing by the judge. The judge has no option here, right? He is required to follow the jury's instruction.
The judge is required to follow the jury's instruction, absent some legal error or some other error that is brought to his attention, or that he finds himself. So in essence, yes, he is going to follow the jury's decision here.
And that will happen tomorrow morning, we're now finding out, yeah.
Yes, and then there will be victim impact statements.
Well, there were a lot of those in the penalty phase.
Yes.
But the sentencing, the formal sentencing is tomorrow, and victims have a right to speak prior to sentencing. Laws have been passed to enhance those rights, further those rights, and I think anybody who chooses to speak will have that right.
And it is just that. It's an opportunity to care for the victims, right? This is seen as something that there was a need for.
Well, you had mentioned earlier that there's been a lot of importance placed now on victims' rights, because for some time the victims often felt that their rights were not really attended to as much. And so this is a newer, I guess, procedure that victims have now been able to present their thoughts in multiple times throughout the trial?
Well, remember, the frequency of a capital case it's rare.
Yeah.
Especially in federal court, exceedingly rare. And so we don't usually get to this phase.
There is no normal.
So,
yeah.
but yes, I believe they would have that right again tomorrow to speak. And I don't know how the prosecution plans on doing this. I don't know if they're going to recall witnesses who already testified. I suspect they may not, but I think they might have the right to.
Mm-hmm.
A few minutes ago, were you expressing a little surprise that the federal government the Justice Department was unwilling to consider a guilty plea in exchange for a life term? Did that surprise you?
Well, first, I think they probably considered it,
Mm-hmm.
which is different than actually agreeing to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think they considered it, but I think ultimately they rejected it, probably for the reasons that we discussed, maybe because they wanted to take that stand and send a message. You know, they're more political, right? So they can take political stances as opposed to the jury that can't. But by seeking it, you know, they put that on the jury.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's, we've all learned a lot about what's going to happen now to someone who becomes a federal death row prisoner. There's not that many of them, right? Just a few dozen. And for years, there were no federal executions. But then toward the end of the Trump administration, there were a bunch. There have been none during Joe Biden's administration, but certainly that could change under a different president.
Well, absolutely. I mean, every 4 years that could change. I think there are 41 federal death row inmates. Mr. Bowers would be 42, if I'm not mistaken. Merrick Garland has spoken as if he's not a big proponent of the death penalty.
Yeah. Although under his leadership, they are continuing to pursue death penalty cases, even though there have been no executions.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
You know, remember this case preceded he being the Attorney General, and more importantly, preceded President Biden in office.
Started under William Barr.
Correct.
Yeah.
And you know, can a president or Attorney General reverse course when the death penalty was being sought and then choose not to? They could, but I think maybe the magnitude of this crime, the impact it had on both the local and international Jewish communities, I think they just decided it wasn't a course they were willing to take.
Yeah. Ken, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know you'll be hanging out with us for a bit more.